seminars, trips, tours, workshops that feature science and engineering at venues throughout the metropolitan St. Louis region. And you can find more information on those events. Most of those are free and are low cost on our website at academyofsciencestl.org, or you can visit us on Facebook or Twitter, or we'll have some e-news sign-up sheets that will make their way around the audience tonight. So if you want to make sure that you get upcoming notice of public talks like tonight's talk, then you can sign up on our e-news sign-up sheets, and we'll make sure that you get that information from both us and the St. Louis Zoo. If you're a student who is attending tonight's talk and you need to verify attendance, we can do that for you after tonight's Q&A. You can just come see one of us at the little zebra-striped table that's outside the auditorium. And I'm going to mention just a couple upcoming events that you might have an interest in attending. On October the 22nd at the Missouri History Museum, we have John Carroll, who is currently the director of Tower Grove Park, and he is going to be talking about Missouri Wilderness, the citizen campaign that protected more than 71,000 acres of Missouri wildlands, and that's being presented in conjunction with a photo exhibition that's at the museum. And features some photos from a couple very good Academy friends, and they're gorgeous, gorgeous photographs. And then on November the 6th, here again in the Living World at the St. Louis Zoo, we have someone from the Fermi National Laboratory who's going to be here to talk about, and how very appropriate, since we've just awarded the Nobel Prize, the Higgs boson and the fate of the universe. That's at 7:30 again here in the Living World Auditorium, and there are some materials out on the table, the little zebra-striped table out there for you to take with you tonight before you leave, and there's a flyer on that particular talk. And then on November 7th, Keeping Time, Mapping the Biological Clock's Wiring and What Happens When We Ignore the Clocks in Our Brains is a partnership talk that we do with Oasis. That'll be at the Center of Clayton. You do need to register to attend that particular talk, and that's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. On the 12th of November, Comets and Cosmopolitans, Fantastic or Fizzle. It's ISON, the Comet of the Century, and that's from 6:30 to 7:30, and again, that's at the Center of Clayton, and you do need to register to attend that event. We have many more upcoming events that you might enjoy, and again, you can find more information on those events either on any of the materials that are out at the table tonight. Feel free to take those with you when you leave, or log on to our website for more information. I think that's everything, and so with that, I'd like to introduce Steve Bircher. He's the curator of mammals here at the zoo, and he's going to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Rose, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the zoo. I am Steve Bircher. I'm curator of mammals. I also manage the zoo's carnivore collection. We have a wonderful speaker here this evening, and she had some tough competition because, as you know, that we have a big Cardinal game tonight, and that's why I'm wearing the Cardinal red tonight. And I mentioned to Amy that if her talk doesn't go well, that we'd ask Chad or one of the AV guys to switch over to the Cardinal game, but that's not going to be the case, because if you had the opportunity to be here last year when Dr. Amy Dickman gave her talk last year, you know that she's a great speaker, and she has a lot of energy and enthusiasm for the carnivores that she works with, and is very passionate. In addition to being the curator of mammals here at the zoo, I also serve as our Wild Care Institute director of Center of the Conservation, the Center for Conservation of Carnivores in Africa. And that's actually how I met Amy about 15 years ago. We were both attending cheetah meetings in South Africa, in Pretoria, South Africa. So I've known her for a number of years, and she's been a longtime partner to our conservation program here at the zoo, our carnivore program. Started out as a cheetah program, but we've expanded those efforts now to include all the carnivores in Tanzania. They all are interrelated, and they all need monitoring and conservation efforts. Amy is also she's accomplished in the world of academics. She is the Kaplan Senior Research Fellow at Oxford University. She founded and directs the Ruaha Carnivore Project in southern Tanzania, which focuses upon researching large carnivore ecology and working with local communities to resolve human-carnivore conflict. She recently received the prestigious Rabinowitz Kaplan Award for the next generation in wildcat conservation. The title of her talk tonight is Women, Warriors, and Witchcraft, Carnivore Ecology and Conservation in Tanzania's Ruaha Landscape. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Amy Dickman.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you to all of you for being here. As Steve said, I knew I had stiff competition with the Cardinals, and as he said, 2 years ago he invited me here, and we had exactly the same issue. So I'm feeling slightly rejected by St. Louis, we'll see. But as Steve mentioned, I'm going to give you an overview of our work in Ruaha. I'm not sure if that's fitting 100%, is it? I think it's good. Let me know if that isn't really fitting on the slide. But in terms of what I'll go through over the next sort of 45 minutes, I'm going to give you a little bit of background to me and to the Ruaha ecosystem, because lots of people haven't heard of it before. I'm going to talk a bit, probably sort of less than half the time, about our work researching carnivore ecology, because that's very important in this area. But the majority of the talk, I'm going to focus on how we're working to reduce human-carnivore conflict, because it's a huge threat in this landscape. And I'm going to discuss the impacts of the project so far and our plans for the future. So the project's been going for just under 5 years, so we've got more plans for the future than we have impact so far, but we'll let you know how both of those are going. So in terms of my background, I actually started off in the zoo world as well. My first sort of wildlife experiences were from interning at the Chester Zoo in the UK, and I always had a passion for big cats, so that was, a fabulous opportunity to work with the zoo. And then once I'd done my undergraduate degree in zoology, I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to work with Dr. Laurie Marker, who many of you might know because she's also a long-term grantee from the St. Louis Zoo Wildcare Institute. And that was an amazing opportunity. I worked there for 6 years and focused obviously a lot on cheetah conservation and cheetah work, some on leopard work as well, slightly less cuddly, and got to do, various bits of hands-on work, sometimes slightly more hands-on than you want, and worked a little bit with lions, and I was always fascinated with lions. They were definitely the species that kind of got me going slightly more than the others, and I'd always had a desire to go out and to work in East Africa. And actually, as a kind of aside, not long ago at home, we discovered in our garden, we dug up these memory boxes that we'd apparently buried when we were about 10. And myself and my siblings had all written in these boxes what we wanted to be doing at the sort of unimaginable age of 30. And mine said, I want to be working in the Serengeti on cheetahs. And so happened to be the year that I found it, happened to be the year that I got my research permit to work in Tanzania on large carnivores. So I was feeling pretty smug, more smug than my brother, who is not a fighter pilot. Anyway, so I was thrilled after working in Namibia for ages and wanting to maybe branch out and just look at working in East Africa, that I met Sarah Durant at a conference in the UK, and she said, when she learnt that I wanted to do a master's and a postgraduate degree, she said, well, why don't you come out and do those in Serengeti with me? And I was like, wow, that's amazing. This is the culmination of a lifelong dream. So I headed out, and I went to visit her in Serengeti, and it was everything I've ever wanted it to be. It was just these spectacular landscapes, cheetahs climbing on the car. I mean, you don't even have to work for your research out there. There's Mary Wickster, actually, in the car, who is also a grantee from here. Everyone was very concerned about staying hydrated in the bush. Safety first. So this was actually my 30th birthday. I was there happily. There is a cheetah in this photograph, so it's technically a work photograph right there. But after this, Sarah said, what do you think? Do you want to sort of, work with me and do your degrees with me? And I was like, absolutely. So I signed on the dotted line. And then I said, when do I start? And she said, right. She said, you need to drive for 24 hours in that direction until you hit a swamp. And I was like, what? And she said, yes, you need to work in Ruaha. And I was like, where? I've never even heard of it. And she said, it's fine. We've got far too many people up here in Serengeti with the gin and tonics and all the other researchers. You need to go down to this unheard of wilderness. So I went, rather bitterly, I have to say, and arrived in Ruaha, which sure enough was completely undeveloped. This is the edge. This was my tent by the edge of the Great Ruaha River. and I did my master's and my Ph.D. looking at the extent and the determinants of human-wildlife conflict in this system. And if any of you have seen the video online of me sleeping under a lion inadvertently, this was the one, the lion slept right here on my very first night in the bush. So it certainly gave me much. I was terrified and wanting to die with fear. I remember thinking, wow, this is the place to come if you want to work right up and close sort of with lions. So the reason that Sarah pushed me down to Ruaha, and I have to say it is the best thing that's probably ever happened to me, I've forgiven her now, is that Ruaha is incredibly important because, as most of you know here, large carnivores are undergoing a real conservation crisis. They are very charismatic species. They are economically valuable to the countries where they occur, both for tourism and for trophy hunting, and they're really important umbrella species, which means that if you conserve something like a leopard, you tend to conserve lots of other smaller species that occur underneath them. But despite that, they're undergoing really severe declines. For instance, lion numbers have halved in the last 20 years, mainly due to habitat loss and to conflict. Cheetahs have also done very badly. They've disappeared from 94% of their resident range. And there are very few remaining large populations of these carnivores left. So, for instance, there are lions. There are only 10 strongholds left with over 500 lions. And I think it's really, really important. There are two ways of looking at this, really. You can either decide to work on the very small populations where you have maybe 30 or 50 individuals left, and that's one way of doing it, the kind of firefighter approach, or you can focus on the remaining few big populations and sort of try to make sure that those are secure for the long term. And I'm of the view that we really do desperately need to focus on those few remaining viable populations, because otherwise, if we look around in another 20 years, they're all going to be like these very small, scattered populations. So Ruaha is one of the most important of those remaining strongholds. It's the second largest lion population in the world, and it's positioned in a crucial area, right here between Mikumi Park, and down here is a corridor into Selous, which goes all the way down, connecting the habitat down to Niassa in Mozambique, and also links back up, there's some linkage still up to Katavi, further west in Tanzania, and this discussion about whether that even facilitates movement further up to the north. So it's a very important connecting population. It is the largest park in East Africa, so it's bigger than Serengeti, for instance, which is much more well known. The second largest in the whole of Africa, and it's this area is bigger than Switzerland, which may or may not mean anything to you. I should translate it into a US state, but I can't right now. So this is the park. It's over 20,000 square kilometers in size, and it's unfenced, which is important. It's bordered by this river source, which flows just between the park and this, which is a wildlife management area and village land. So the village land is right here, and especially when this river isn't as important. So in the wet season, when there's water everywhere, the wildlife tends to move away from concentrating on the river into the park and onto village land. So there's huge amounts of conflict in this area, and this is where I'll be talking about the conflict work that we do. So it has over 10% of all the world's lions. It's a beautiful park. I encourage anyone to visit. It's really spectacular and has lovely lodges. As I mentioned, it has over a tenth of all the world's lions. Here are lions doing what they do best, which is just sleep. It has one of only 4 East African cheetah populations with over 200 adults. It has one of only 6 viable populations of African wild dogs left, the third largest in the world, and also has globally important populations of spotted hyenas. I had to work very hard to get a cute picture of spotted hyenas, and leopards. So it's really important for all these large carnivores. However, it's extremely understudied relative to its importance. If you look at some of the big remaining lion populations that are left, Ruaha comes in second only to Selous, which is also in southern Tanzania. But if you look at the number of scientific papers that have been published on lions in these ecosystems, it's hugely skewed towards places like Serengeti and Kruger. So sort of the studying in these areas sort of outweighs relatively the number of lions there. And if you look at Ruaha, it has had no publications at all on the carnivores there up until 2009. And that has really prevented the development of targeted local conservation plans for that area. So against that background of real wildlife wealth, though, you've got huge human poverty. So it's very poor economically. 90% of people live on less than $2 a day, and 60% live on less than $1 a day. That means that 45% of people are undernourished, 2/3 have no access to clean water or a form of improved sanitation, so diseases like cholera and giardia are endemic. There's very little access to any form of quality medical care, and the life expectancy is less than 50. And when you're in that extreme poverty, it really restricts the access to education, partly because people need the children to be working at home, and secondary education people have to pay for, and that really limits the options for people getting out of this poverty trap and improving things for their family. And when you've got these very poor communities living cheek by jowl alongside these very important carnivore populations, it isn't a recipe for happy coexistence. Basically, the carnivores come onto village land, they kill people's livestock, and if this is the cow that you've been keeping aside for your son's circumcision ceremony, and it's one of your only 3 cows that you own in the world, and a lion or a leopard comes in and does that, you're not going to react well. So what tends to happen is that people then obviously put out poison, and this was the direct consequence of this killing. Someone put out poison for the carcass, and the lions were killed afterwards. So this is a huge issue, both for the people and for the carnivores. So I set up the Carnivore Project in 2009 under an Oxford University fellowship with 2 main aims: to provide data on carnivore populations and ecology so that we can inform conservation strategies, and to mitigate the intense human-carnivore conflict that occurs in this globally important landscape. We work on all 5 large carnivores, so lion, leopard, cheetah, African wild dog, and spotted hyena, and it started with me and 2 Tanzanians. So this is how it started. Basically, we were looking for a plot of village land. We wanted a Barabeg area, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We wanted a place with a nice view, which the Tanzanians totally didn't understand, but we got one. This is looking out towards Ruaha National Park. We set up tents under a tree. Setting up camp took about 20 minutes. And we did discover we had an uneasy timeshare with a leopard that lived in this bush. But as long as she came out at night and we stayed in our tents at night, all fine. And then we built a kitchen, our top priority. This is still our kitchen today, although we do now have a table. Oh, goodness me, all gone crazy. This is the food that we eat. So there's a lot of ugali, which is the local sort of mealy meal, and some sort of charred meat. I'm vegetarian, so happily I don't have to deal with that. I eat a lot of beans, like at least 2 meals a day. So the other priority was where those beans go, so we built a toilet. This was wonderful. We were very happy with the toilet until, unfortunately, there was a catastrophic toilet collapse about a month ago, and I almost died in this, having to be on the toilet at the time. And I remember thinking at the moment, this cannot be how it ends. I'm not going to have my obituary end with she died in a tragic toilet accident. So that's now repaired, although it gives me a palpitation every time I have to go into my little ensuite. It's the shower. So this is beside the tent. This is the tent where I sort of work and live over there. We put over sort of shade over it with thatching. And then, yes, it's a nice little sort of tented camp. My husband came out to help us set up the project for the first 6 months. So it's a very nice little field camp, and anyone that's passing, you're welcome to come and test our reinforced toilet. In terms of the carnivore ecology, we're using 2 main forms of techniques. We're using camera trapping and direct carnivore sightings to try to assess the populations for conservation plans. And this has been something that St. Louis has been really seminal in getting off the ground. So for the camera trapping, we've had all the normal species you'd expect from a savanna ecosystem, so things like curious baboons, elephants, kudu. What we're fairly sure is a giraffe. Civet, which interestingly in this case is sniffing a python. We really want to see how that worked out, but we didn't. Things like servals, so great to see the smaller carnivores coming up on the camera traps. Curious local people. And then we had this week of just debauchery in front of the camera traps. So we had mating aardvarks, which you just don't even see an aardvark, let alone mating aardvarks. And then much to the thrill of the guys. So it's set up in this area. There's a local tribe called the Barabeg who we couldn't get anywhere near. I'll talk more about it. But we couldn't really talk to them at all. But what the guys knew about them is that they had this incredible underwear, this beaded underwear. And they kept saying to me, can we go and ask them to see their underwear? And I'm like, no. In what area is it, what society is it fine to go and ask some people who don't like you if you could see their underwear? And so they were a bit grumpy about it. So they were thrilled this one day when along came the Barabeg women, stripped off in front of our camera traps. Usually they wear these nice black shukas, but you see them walk along, they're laughing, they look at the camera trap, they strip off their shuka, and they start dancing in front of the camera traps. Our guys were absolutely thrilled. They just said to me, Amy, why don't we have the expensive camera traps with video? I was like, perverts. But more importantly for me, not for them, we did get all 5 of the large carnivores on the camera trap, so spotted hyenas, who tend to eat it, it's kind of annoying. African wild dogs, that's a really important place for them, as I mentioned. Cheetahs, very hard to camera trap cheetahs, they have such big ranges. Leopards, I have some gorgeous leopard photos from the area, and lions. So this lion actually arrived at the camera trap about 20 minutes after we'd set it up, which made us all feel slightly less secure when we were setting them up. So the camera trapping has been really important. It's provided very important, valuable sort of first data on carnivore ecology in this landscape. It's provided information on reproduction, on group size of the large carnivores, on the activity patterns in terms of nocturnal patterns versus diurnal, the habitat use, species diversity. For instance, we were the first ones to be able to prove that striped hyenas actually occur down here, and so we shared that with the Tanzanian authorities, who confirmed it. And human pressure in different land use zones. So we were comparing the national park to the hunting areas and the village land. And it's just been written up by a Tanzanian research assistant for his MSc, so it's had really important capacity building as well. And now there's a real need, though, to extend those grids across the landscape so that we can do meaningful conservation planning and look at carnivore densities across the landscape. We need about 60 more camera traps, and we're going to start putting these grids in all the different land use zones, so in different areas of the park, and in the hunting zones and the village areas. And we're going to have a permanent grid that will be set up in the center of the park here and give us really good information on mammal dynamics over time, particularly with the river system there. And if people want to get involved with this sort of monitoring, you can join what we call the Ruaha Explorers Club. Here you can sponsor a camera trap. It costs $200 for a year, and you get sent pictures from your camera trap and told where it's placed in the landscape and stuff. And you get a lot of pictures of grass, but sometimes you get cool pictures of like wild dogs and things like that. So we also, with the direct sightings, so far we've equipped 10 park drivers with digital cameras so that they record any carnivores that they see. And it's very important local capacity building and has been very successful at engaging people in carnivore monitoring. So they take amazing photos of the carnivores in the park that they see, and then we do individual identification of them, which is, we're starting, so it's a huge task. So for instance, with lions, you use the whisker spot pattern to work out which individual it is, because that acts like a fingerprint for them. For leopards, you can use, obviously, the spot and the coat patterns. For cheetahs, the same, and we're trying to look at developing computer programs for this now. For wild dogs, obviously, the coat pattern, and particularly the tail pattern, the amount of white is very useful for individual identification. And even spotted hyenas, we're using their spot patterns for individual ID. In addition to that, you get really important sort of information on demography and reproduction, and just cute things to look at. And important data on things like stalking, prey selection, hunting. And we found that there's a huge preference in this area. We see a lot of lions killing giraffe. They're very successful at killing giraffe in this area. So there's a lot of preying upon those. We also just get really nice photos from the lodge drivers. They're really excited by this. We're about to do an annual competition for them. And they get photographs of these animals that are wonderful because we can use them for our sort of advertising of the project. And they really just show the beauty and the wonderment of this landscape in a way that I could never really explain it without saying to people, look, this is why it's worth working here, and this is why it's worth conserving these animals in this landscape. So we've had at the moment over 4,500 sightings of carnivores, and combined with the camera trapping data, we've been able to build maps of carnivore presence across the landscape. So those maps here, so this is our predictive map of lion occurrence, and you can see that these red cells are the most likely to have lions in them, and this is the border with the village land. So actually over 65% of the key carnivore areas are very close to village land. Almost all of them are within a kilometre. So it means that what happens on village land really affects what happens in the park. So it's absolutely critical that we don't just focus upon working in the national park and ignore what's happening outside. We have to engage in village land as well. And that means that understanding and addressing human-carnivore conflict is absolutely critical. It is a really urgent need to address this in this area. And I love coming to zoos and seeing the carnivores here, because unfortunately this is how I tend to see a lot of carnivores in places like Ruaha. So these are just some of the images of the carnivores that we tend to see. A lot of these are poisonings or spearings. That one was shot, I think. That was poisoned. There's a really high level of carnivore killing. In fact, it's the highest documented rate of lion killing anywhere in East Africa. So there's two things that really jumped out at us when we started looking at how much killing was happening, aside from just the sheer magnitude of it. Firstly, a lot of the lions that we saw that were killed had their front right paws cut off. And we had no idea why that was, but it was very obvious that over half of the carcasses had that happening. And the second thing was a lot of the females were heavily pregnant. And a lot of the animals that were being killed were these pregnant females. And that's incredibly damaging for a population, more damaging than any other age group that you can take out. So it really is important to look at that. What we heard from local people is that most of the killings were happening from the Barabaig tribe. Now, this is a tribe that most people haven't heard of. It's a little bit like Ruaha itself, it's sort of this undiscovered gem. But the Barabaig are very like the Maasai. They're traditional pastoralists. They're heavily dependent upon their cattle. And they're an incredibly interesting group of people. I mean, really fascinating to work with. The women wear this amazing gold jewelry. The guys tend to do traditional scarification around their eyes. But they're extremely hard to work with. You find almost nothing written about the Barabaig if you look up. There's literally, compared to the thousands of things you get on the Maasai, and there's 1 or 2 articles and 1 book from the 70s that even mention the Barabaig. And that is because they will run away rather than talk to you. They're extremely secretive. They're very hostile of working with any group that they don't trust. And we knew we had to try to engage with them to understand this lion killing, and trying to get in and actually engage them was almost impossible. We also knew that they were a very scary group of people, and they genuinely are quite an intimidating group. Traditionally in Barabaig culture, to become a man, you either have to kill a dangerous animal like a lion, which is why a lot of this lion killing was happening, or you can kill a person from a non-Barabaig tribe. So as the only people in the area who were not Barabaig, I was like, how much do I really care about them killing lions? I mean, there are like 25,000 lions. So it really tests your commitment to how much you want to kill lions, how much you want to stop lion killing, if you fear that you might be the next in line. And when I made the mistake one day of looking up murder rates for some reason in our local area, and the murder rate is sky high because these guys unfortunately tend to murder people at the drop of a hat. I mean, we've seen it multiple times in the study area. Do visit, by the way, it's lovely. But no, it is all nice, they're fine. But unfortunately, there was quite a lot of murder and a lot of witchcraft beliefs. Lots of that was tied up with witchcraft, and it did make for a lot of uneasy nights in the tent, wondering if I was going to be murdered as a witch. And particularly, I have to say, there was this one time when it wasn't raining, it should have rained, and then finally in the villages close by, they killed 8 women to try to make it rain because they thought they were witches stopping it rain. And the next day it rained. And of course I was like, I can't believe that happened. But the guy said to me, it's a good thing, if it hadn't rained, they would have killed another one, and eventually maybe 10 or 12 is the magic number. But it rained in all the villages apart from our village. And this was still early on when we were setting up the project, and I remember hearing just a few whispers and some dirty looks. I remember thinking, people saying, what's different about this village? And I remember thinking, oh God, the one thing that's different about this village that is very obvious, they have a crazy white person living in it. So I was very worried. I remember lying in bed at night thinking, really, are they coming? I could hear the guys approaching with their spears, and it didn't make for a very restful sleep. And then it rained, and I've never been as happy to see rain in my whole life. So it definitely made it somewhat nerve-wracking to be there with them, and we tried everything. Even though they were these kind of murderous group, we knew we had to break in with them. So we tried all the classic techniques, putting up notices, trying to engage the elders, going to the other sort of, pastoral assemblies. None of it worked. And then finally, we put up a solar panel in camp about 2 years on when we were just about to give up trying to engage with the Barabaig at all. We put up a solar panel to charge our laptops, and then the Barabaig came to charge their cell phones. And we were like, we would never have come up with it. In a month of Sundays, we wouldn't have thought of the way of getting with this crazy tribal group was to offer them a way to charge their cell phones in the bush. But they turned up, they handed us out their cell phones, they disappeared back into the bush, but it gave them an opportunity to come to the camp and to learn about what we were doing in a sort of non-threatening way. So they started to come and just watch what we were doing, and just very sort of on the outskirts at the beginning. And then finally they would sit and they would sort of look at the pictures of things we would have, and it was a very slow process. But after about 4 months, 5 months, they finally said to us, look, we're going to come and we're going to talk to you about maybe the way forward. So these young guys turned up, the warriors, which is exactly the group of people we wanted to talk to. They arrived at our camp. We were thrilled. Like, this was the highlight of all my work with the young warriors. We talked about what we did at the project. We just chatted about everything. We laughed about the fact it had taken over 2 years to get this good communication. I explained that I was terrified half the time because I thought they were coming to kill me as a witch. They thought that was very funny. They were like, why would we kill you? I'm like, you kill everyone. But they were laughing, and then they said, we're scared of you too. And I was like, how are we scary? I mean, we've done everything by the book to be really respectful. And they said, those pots you have. And I said, what pots? They said, those Tupperware pots in your kitchen. I was like, okay, I don't know how they're scary. I said, we keep sugar in them. And so I demonstrated that we kept sugar in them, and they were like, They said, that's okay. And I said, what did you think? And they said, we thought you kept blood in from human sacrifices. They said, that's what we would do. And I'm like, you see, now I'm scared again. But it was an interesting discussion. But we had a great time. We all drank a lot of the disgusting honey beer. And by the time they left, we were like, okay, we have cracked it. And I went to bed that night feeling on top of the world because this was the breakthrough we had wanted. I thought, this is it. It's going to be plain sailing from now on. Within a week, we heard that same group of guys had gone out and they'd killed 7 lions. And one of the key things we had said in our meeting with them is that we're trying to explain what we were doing and saying, we're not here as wildlife division. We're not here to create problems for you guys. All we're trying to do is to understand why you're having problems and then see if we can find a better way of solving it. And when this happened, I was furious and just I don't really get depressed that easily out there, but this was probably the lowest point of the whole process. The guys, the research assistants, were crying, and I thought, sod it, I'm just going to go to Wildlife Division, just shop them all. I don't care, we can't work with them. They clearly don't want to work with us constructively. And I called Leela, a friend of mine in Kenya, who runs Lion Guardians, and I explained to her the situation. She said, this is a test. She said, I've had to sit and watch people spear lions in front of me. And she said, they're just waiting to see what you'll do. They know you know about it. So she said, you have to do nothing. And we sat on our hands, we did nothing for like a week, and it was the hardest thing I think I've ever done. And then they called and they said, they came up to the camp and said, we're going to invite you down to our secret meeting in the bush. And so we went down to this meeting under a tamarind tree, probably the first time they've ever invited outsiders down to these tribal meetings. They gave us a cow because they said we can't work with people without cows. It's just weird and wrong. So we took the cow, great. They promptly slaughtered the cow, slightly unhappily for my cow. But they wanted to share meat with us, which is a really important part of their bonding. And they said, right, I've never been as happy to get meat being a lifelong vegetarian. And they said to us, now we're going to work with you like we're family. They said, we lie all the time. They said, we tell people we don't kill these animals. They said, we kill lions and hyenas all the time. They said, if you really want to understand what's happening, then we'll share that information with you. And we were like, great, this was the breakthrough, although I wish that 7 lions didn't have to kill to get there. But when they talked to us about it, obviously depredation, so the carnivore attacks on livestock, was a key driver of conflict. 60% of people had suffered attacks, and on average we worked out that cost people 18% of their annual cash income. And that's a huge problem for these extremely poor households. Also, the reaction to people's attacks was heightened by fears of witchcraft. So, for instance, they thought that people could bewitch lions and turn them into spirit lions, or that hyenas rode around with witches on their back, apparently naked invisible witches who are covered in oil. That's an important detail, right? Yeah. And they believe that basically if you have an attack on your livestock, your neighbor doesn't have one, and he's sending this bewitched animal over to kill your stock so that it can drag it back to his house and he can eat meat without killing his own livestock. And basically that means that the human-carnivore conflict is just being intensified by intertribal conflict between the different groups. No one ever talks to each other, realizes they're both having attacks and they're both blaming the other person. But it's very serious. People take it very seriously, and those kind of attacks have even led to murder, as does the smallest disagreement around here. But, we knew of lion attacks where the people had gone and drowned the local witch doctor because they thought he'd sent over the lion to go and cause the attack. There was also amongst people very little knowledge of the reasons for wildlife conservation around Ruaha or the value of that area for wildlife. There was a poor relationship with the park. 93% of people had no benefits from wildlife. And of those that did, so we thought, okay, 7% of people have some benefits. That's not terrible. And it turned out when they said the only benefits they do get are from killing lions, because that's a way that they get assets, they get cattle, they get women, and they get social status. So they explained to us, and this is just a short clip, if it works, of a Barabeg lion hunt. So this is the guy that I'm going to mention briefly, because as you can see, he has got the shuka. They've got a lion trapped down here. This guy's being crazy. They're waiting for it to get in a good position. And he's got the shuka, the cloth, wrapped around his arm there. And basically what that means is that he has been picked out as the young guys, as the bravest young warrior amongst the group. And when they've got the lion in a position where they think, it's surrounded, he will give his spear up to other people. He will go up and he will try to basically wind the lion up so that it can come out and attack him, ideally on this small cloth-covered portion of his arm. Now, obviously, that doesn't work very well, because the lion comes out and rips off the other arm or a leg or something else. But it gives him the opportunity to distract the lion, and he's picked the bravest warriors from behind him to try to spear that lion. And the first guy that throws the spear that hits the lion gets to be the one that has all the rewards later on. And this guy gets nothing apart from the fact that women dance for him later. I was like, wow, men will really do anything to have women dance for them. It's like, God. But it really is an important driver here. So the guy that throws the first spear gets to cut off that right front paw, and then he uses that central claw. He takes this claw out of the paw, and he puts it on his arm in a little amulet. And then importantly, he goes around to all the Barabeg households, and they reward him with cattle, so he gets a form of wealth from them, and the women give him these necklaces so as a sign of approval from the women, and he basically gets to sleep with lots of women. So it's all about, of course, money and sex, like everything else, but a young man can get about 20 cattle this way, and that's worth about $4,000. So it's a really important and probably the only way at that time of these guys getting that form of wealth for them. So now that we understood it all better, we were totally stumped in terms of how we were going to deal with all this, but we broke it down and we thought there are 5 things we have to do to reduce conflict. We have to reduce the attacks. That's the first thing everyone mentions about living with carnivores. We have to provide tangible benefits from carnivore presence, critically which have women's support, because women are playing an important role in driving the killing. We have to improve knowledge and relationship with the park. We have to reduce intertribal tensions, and we have to enable warriors to get status, women, and cattle without killing lions. We're like, simple, done. We thought, okay, let's start with the simple stuff. Reducing attacks is relatively simple. So we employed village monitors, one in every local village, and they basically respond to any attack very quickly, and they help people correctly identify which species was responsible. And they talk to everyone and share the best ways of preventing attacks with all the other local people. So, for instance, the use of scarecrows can be effective, so they talk to people about what methods they can use. Also, that monitoring of over 300 households now enables us to map where the attacks are happening, and also then we can predict where likely conflict hotspots are so that we can preemptively target our conflict mitigation. Because once people have had an attack, they're negative for decades. You need to get in there before they've had an attack and try to reduce the chances of that attack ever occurring. And the best way of doing that is by protecting livestock enclosures. 65% of the attacks occur in livestock enclosures because they're often very weak. Like, I could jump into that livestock enclosure. So it's really not challenging for a leopard. What we do is we work with them on a cost-sharing basis, and we say to the householder that we will reinforce the enclosure with chain link fence, and this becomes a really effective way of keeping predators out. So far we've done 60 of these. They are 100% effective when they're used correctly. We had one attack where somebody had left it open, and the hyena just walked in. It seems to reduce attacks even at neighbouring bomas. We were worried about the fact that the boma is the livestock enclosure. So we were worried that it might be protecting one person but shifting the problem onto the next door person. But when we looked at the number of attacks for the 3 months before and after improvement, the people who had the enclosures had no attacks after improvement. Their next door neighbours, their attacks had also gone down significantly, potentially because the carnivores just aren't being attracted to those areas with easy food anymore. And that was contrasted with a slight increase in the other people. This wasn't significant. It's very important, it reduces the economic pressure on the households and the retaliatory killing of large carnivores. We'd like to build 100 more this year because this is one of the most significant ways of immediately reducing conflict. Also, we've looked at, there are lots of attacks, 35% obviously are happening out in the bush, and that's much harder to deal with. So we've worked with the Cheetah Conservation Fund in Namibia, and in about 2 weeks' time, we're going to get the first shipment of Anatolian Shepherd guarding dogs out to Tanzania to see how well they'll work. And basically, these dogs, I mean, they look ridiculous when you get them. They're like this big, and you give them to a farm, and you're like, there you go. And they're like, what is that? Have you seen a leopard? That's just like bait. But if it gets through the initial phase, then basically you rear them with your goats, your cattle, whatever it is. They think they're a goat or a cow. They're completely mentally screwed up, but they will protect those animals. So they just are a line of defense where if a carnivore comes to threaten them, they stand there in the middle and they're like, I don't think so, you've got to come through me. And most carnivores don't want to get injured. They don't want that sort of confrontation. So they'll go hopefully and switch back to wild prey or an easier source of food. So we're going to test that. The second way that we've got to reduce conflict is providing benefits and engaging the women. So because it's really important that those benefits have got to come from the communities themselves, not sort of imposed by us, we asked all the villagers to vote on which benefits they would most appreciate from carnivore presence. It was mainly women at these meetings, interestingly, and the priorities came out all the same things you would expect from any one of us who lives in that situation. So better education for their children, better access to healthcare, and improved veterinary medicines, because those, their livestock are absolutely fundamental to their way of life. So for the schools, this was not surprising. The schools are extremely under-resourced. So they have, very little equipment. There's way too many students for the numbers of teachers they have. They don't have things like books and pens and pencils, so it's very hard for anyone to actually retain the information. They don't have simple things like, chairs and desks, and lots of students just can't go to school just because they don't have the money for simple things like uniforms. So we set up a project called Kids for Cats, and this is where we twin local village schools with international schools, mainly in the US or the UK, and they raise about $500 a year, and they send that back to us so that we can buy equipment for the school, whatever the school most needs, and that's usually just books and pens. And we put our logo on everything they get so that we reinforce that link between the carnivore presence and the benefit to the community. So far we've twinned 7 schools, but we'd like to do more, so anyone who knows of an interested school, please let me know. Secondly, because it was very important not to just engage the primary schools, we developed the Simba scholarships, and these are basically a way of getting pastoralist children the opportunity to go through secondary school, which most of them will never get. It costs $1,500 for a 4-year scholarship, and this last year we awarded 6 scholarships. It's a competitive process. We do half for boys and half for girls. And we'd like to do 6 more each year, just it gives them a really good way of seeing a real benefit for them and their whole families that is linked strongly back to the presence of carnivores. You'll see even in these remote villages, the presence of Obama is still here. These are the Obama pens they get. That's the only thing you can buy in the local village. We also equipped for the healthcare, we've equipped a local village clinic, which is focused on maternal and infant health. And we'd like to start a twinned initiative like with the schools, because this would be a good way of getting some more training and stuff for the equipment, for the clinic. For the veterinary medicines, we didn't have enough money to give everyone veterinary medicines, so we've made it eligible for those who have engaged in the Fortified BOMA program. So once they fortify their livestock enclosure, then they get enrolled into a program where they can have reduced price and good quality veterinary medicines. And that's been hugely important for local people because it reduces their attacks for carnivores and it reduces disease losses. And all the benefits are done in very close partnership with the villagers and with the authorities. In terms of improving knowledge and the view of the park, one of the most important ways we do that is through DVD nights. So we take a generator and a DVD and we show these wildlife videos out in the local communities. These are really, really popular. I mean, everyone turns up. They all just want to see Mission Impossible, but tough. They see Living with Lions and they'll like it. But I mean, we do them in the village centres. We've had over 10,000 people come to these so far. Very importantly, we also go out to the remote sub-villages because these are the people having most of the problems with carnivores, and these are the ones that are doing most of the killing. And we also do them in the schools just to try to encourage the next generation of people to be interested in wildlife. For the view of the park, the most important way of getting people engaged with the park is taking them in. The vast majority of people, even though they all live within 30 kilometers of the park boundary, have never been in there legally. So it's huge, and they have huge misconceptions about what it is and what it involves. So we take in the warriors, We take in the women, and this car was actually paid for by St. Louis, so that's been really good. And we take in local children, and it's really good because they get to meet people who work in the park and explain about the role of it and the importance of it for the local economy. But the most important thing, definitely if you ask them, is getting to see the plains land, because this is just unheard of. So at 11 o'clock every day we have to be at the airstrip to see the coastal plain land. Then they basically intimidate all the tourists coming off the plane. And then everyone gets their picture with the shiny new coastal plain. But this has had a huge effect. I mean, 99% of people say they're more positive towards the park, and 75% of people say they're more positive towards dangerous animals like lions because they didn't realize they could be relaxed. They've only ever seen them attacking their livestock or attacking people. So to see them in a different way and to see the value that other people give them is really important. Reducing intertribal tensions. I was like, whoa, I have no idea how to do this, so I'm just going to leave it. But we literally didn't know how to go about this at all until we realized that the tribes didn't talk to each other, and that was a big problem. The only thing that gave us sort of a light into how we should deal with it was when the World Cup happened in South Africa. And so suddenly, this is the only way that young men would get together. They would get together to play football. So we realized the best way of improving intertribal communication was sponsoring village football teams. We've just started doing this, and hopefully this is going to be a way that you just start to get people talking amongst each other and breaking down a few of those barriers that lead to the fears of things like spirit lions. Then we've got to include the warriors. The warriors are absolutely central because they are the ones going out and doing the killing, and they're very influential locally. So we worked with a program up in Kenya called Lion Guardians, and this is basically where the young men fulfill a traditional warrior role. So they will track lions, and they will look for other large carnivores, they find lost stock, and they help protect the community. But importantly, they have this job, which is quite a well-paid job locally, but they are only paid for as long as there is no carnivore killing in their zone. And that is a very powerful reason for their entire age set, all the other young warriors, not to go and poison or spear in that area. So because these guys are well respected, it's very against their culture to go and take away somebody else's job or go and harm them in some way. So it's just because you're employing those influential warriors, it has a very important knock-on effect across the whole zone. They've also said they want sort of literacy training, so they have Warrior School, which provides them with education, numeracy, and literacy training. The money from the job translates into them being able to buy cattle every month rather than having to risk life and limb killing a lion, and it gives them status because they're the ones that everyone goes to fill in forms and things. And very importantly, the women are finally realizing the link between the local benefits and the lions, so they're less encouraging of people going away and killing them. And I've seen this for the first time only in the past 6 months. I've watched the women who are quite powerful in Barabeg society get up and start saying to the guys who still want to go and kill lions, you know, we see our children going to school and we see the clinic that we can now give birth in without, you know, as many fear of complications. So, you know, if you do that and kill all the lions, you know, that might go away. So it's an important way of just reaching the entire community. So far, the Guardians have found over 500 lost stock, they found 5 lost children, and they've stopped 6 lion hunts happening so far. And a very important part of the project, sort of looking into the longer term, is capacity building amongst people. You know, I don't want to be doing this in 20 years, I'm tired already, so they need to start doing it. All the project staff, apart from me, are Tanzanian, and so far we've enrolled 75% of them in further education. And they're all super passionate, great people, I mean, very keen to get involved. So Msafiri has just come back from Oxford University. He did his postgraduate diploma in wildlife conservation, and Monty just about a month ago finished his master's degree using the data that St. Louis helped us get for the camera trapping. So that's very important that we're training the next generation of Tanzanian conservation scientists, that they can take these things and apply them both in Ruaha or elsewhere if they want to move on. So looking at the impact of the project so far, the attacks have been reduced significantly in study households that we work with, and there have been none in the fortified enclosures. In 2007, when we did our first survey, 7% of people saw any benefits from wildlife, mainly from killing them, and now 76% of people do. Very few mention killing them, which is good. 3% of people specifically recognized benefits from carnivores, and now 24% of people do. This is something that's slower because they are obviously much more dangerous. And the hostility, when you look at attitude scores towards carnivores, is decreasing. But, you know, these people lied to us for years. Like, my whole Ph.D. is total rubbish. I might as well just throw it away. So we weren't, you know, surveys, all right. But, you know, you can't really just go on them without any sort of other metric of success. And the most important aim of our work is not what people say, but obviously what people do. in terms of reducing carnivore killings. So the only area we have really good data on this, because we monitor every household, because we can hear if there's a lion being killed, because you hear the celebrations, is looking around our core village in the number of carnivores killed. And in 2011, there were 39 carnivores killed in that area, a very small area. In 2012, that had dropped to 12 carnivores killed, and 2013, that had dropped to 3. So, and we're fairly confident we're detecting the vast majority of these. So I really think that's a real decline in carnivore killing. And there's over an 80% reduction in carnivore killings in our core area since 2011. But there is a genuine change in the Barabaig attitudes towards lion killing. And this was really evidence for me about probably 3 months ago now, when we heard that some young men had tried to go into the park and go on a lion hunt. And this is something that before was openly encouraged by the whole Barabaig community. And it turned out that they'd been stopped from going in by the elders. They were called back to a village meeting, which is their sort of, tribal court, basically. And they were fined cattle. Every young man that tried to go in the lion hunt was fined a cow, because they said, you are now trying to threaten something that's good for the village. And this was nothing to do with us. They didn't even ask us. They didn't, we weren't at that meeting. Nothing was to do with us. It was very intrinsically that it came from them. And seeing that change from people rewarding people for lion killing by giving them cattle to fining them, with cattle for going out and killing lions was really a powerful indicator of success in this small area. So the villages have got important local benefits in terms of healthcare, jobs and education, and improved economic security. But we're still only working in 10 of the 22 local villages, and we're working intensively in 3 of them. So even though we've made a lot of progress, there's much more to be done. We want to extend the camera trapping grids, so we've got a really good idea of carnivore ecology. We want to equip at least 20 park drivers with cameras. We want to satellite collar lions on village land so that we get an understanding of their movement. We want to do demographic data and individual identification of all the carnivores, and that's a huge task that we'll probably engage a bit with zoos in, because we can't do it ourselves. We want monitors and lion guardians in all 21 of the local villages. The reason it says 22 in the other one is because one of them is in the park. We want to predator-proof all high-risk enclosures, of which there are hundreds. We would like to twin all 24 local schools and twin at least 3 of the clinics. We need to investigate bushmeat and trade issues, because these are growing threats around the area. And we'd like to eventually, in the next, I would say, 5 to 10 years, train Tanzanians up to Ph.D. level so that they can take this on and develop it further. And we really want to continue to strengthen our zoo partnerships, because zoos have been a huge part of our success so far, and we really want to make sure that we come back here, tell you guys about what we're doing, and make sure that we strengthen that going forward. So in summary, I think, obviously I'm slightly biased, but I do think that we've made a significant contribution towards carnivore research and conservation in a really critically important area. And the project is having very important benefits for both people and predators, and St. Louis Zoo has been a really vital part of that success. As Steve said, they've been our longest standing supporter. They supported me through my PhD, so it's been really great to work with them, evolving and developing this project and being able to come back and show some results from Ruaha and show that their work is really having an impact. And all of you guys are an important part of that, so I just want to come back and say thank you to you. So these are University of Oxford does my fellowship with Panthera. These are our 6 major donors, so I'd really like to thank you all for all of your support and see if you have any questions. Any questions? Hang on. Yep.
I'm curious about the cattle. Where did they initially get the cattle, but now it's such a big thing for them? Where did the cattle come from?
Well, pastoral groups have always been very focused on cattle. Like ever since, it was originally these are Nilotic groups down from the Nile. Cattle were always their source of wealth. So they buy and trade cattle amongst themselves, and they usually walk cattle to the main sort of villages they can go and trade in and buy new cattle. But cattle is very fundamentally important to them. It's not just a source of wealth. If you give them $200 to replace a cow, it's not the same as having that cow, because they value, the coat color and the pattern and everything else. So there's a lot of trading, breeding themselves, and then going sometimes to markets and getting more cattle. Okay.
Did you ever meet or work with George Anderson?
George Anderson. Was that?
Or was that you before your time?
Sorry, what was the name?
George Anderson?
No, I didn't actually meet him, no. Sadly, before my time was, that was... Oh, the Adamsons. We talking about? No, I didn't meet them either. That was before my time, sadly. But yeah, that would have been fun. Sorry, I can't see the lights are too much. Yeah, at the back.
How did you bridge the language barrier?
That's a good question. I mean, the Barabeg speak Key Barabeg and some Key Swahili. And then our team obviously all speak Swahili. I speak some Swahili. Happily, we had one guy, one of our first monitors, who was fluent in both Swahili and Barabeg. So he was a really important first sort of connector between us, because obviously language barriers are very hard, to bridge. It makes you feel very foreign. So having someone who could communicate both sides was really key. And now a lot of them, the Barabeg who we employ as Lion Guardians, are learning a lot more Swahili and learning English as well. So that's sort of coming down with time. Yeah, here.
So, how large, again, is the wild dog population? How healthy is that population? And as I recall from years ago in Serengeti, they were almost decimated from dismember from the local canine population.
Yeah.
What's the situation there?
The situation in Ruaha, they estimate about 500, and which is a total thumbsuck. All these guesstimates of numbers are really guesstimates. So we are looking at the next 2 years, we'll be looking at doing these through the camera trapping grids, getting a lot better ideas of density and numbers. But I think people focus too much to some degree on numbers, and as you say, what's happening to the population is more important. What are the trends over time? And that's something that we're going to be looking at extensively. For the wild dogs, they haven't gone through that catastrophic decline that they have in Serengeti, where they were extirpated up there, as you say. But there is certainly a threat from a growing domestic dog population. And right now, as we speak, actually, we're having a vaccination campaign that we're doing, where we're vaccinating local village dogs, just because that is a threat to the wild dogs, because they den a lot on village land. But at the moment, I wouldn't want to say stable, but we haven't got an evidence of a sharp decline in Ruaha. So it's still a very important population for them. Yeah.
Are there any game drives or tourism that can help finance the conservation of the park?
There is tourism in the area. It's a beautiful area to visit. There are lovely lodges and stuff. So there's certainly tourism, but Tanzania has about 17 national parks, and only 2 of them make money. So all the other national parks are kind of being sort of subsidized by those ones, Serengeti and Kilimanjaro, who make a lot of money. So the individual tour companies do support to some degree conservation around it, but it's never going to be at the level that's probably needed for those populations. So increasing tourism to Ruaha is definitely a key aim of all the local people there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
About what you just asked. Next year, the St. Louis Zoo is going to be offering a trip to Tanzania, and I just want to relieve some of your fears. She talked about Verbeck people and how murderous they are. And all the years that we've been running trips to Tanzania and Kenya, we've never had anybody murdered. So very safe. We've never lost a traveler, so we offer these kinds of trips. They're very safe, and I think even in the area where
We'll keep you safe.
very safe, so please don't.
Yeah, they only murder each other. Yes, it is safe. It is very safe. Yes, here.
Talk a little bit about living in the wild and what you had to overcome, like going to an area where you didn't have facilities, and how you got your supplies, and maybe diseases or things like that you had to deal with.
This isn't going to encourage people to go, is it? No, obviously there are challenges of being over there, and that area in particular, just because we're a very basic camp. We had, 3 tents and no vehicle, which was a big problem at the beginning, because I kept saying to Oxford, it would be really nice to have a vehicle, because we're in an area with man-eating lions. Walking around isn't ideal. But and actually St. Louis, I think, gave us our first vehicle, that ancient car. That wasn't a judgment on your grant, by the way. But no, it was great to get any sort of vehicle. So I think it's challenging where we are, because it's far away. It's 130 kilometers from the nearest sort of small town where we get our supplies. So about twice a week now we take, this old car, which only breaks down about 17 times, into the local village or the local town, and we get supplies from there. Undoubtedly, there are diseases and stuff. Everyone used to come and get really, really sick, because I didn't think it was worthwhile getting bottled water, because it was very hard to get, until some World Health Organization people came and tested the water. And they said, oh my God, they said, this is the worst water we've ever tested. It's horrendous. You don't shower in this, do you? And we were like, who would shower in it? That's suicide. I'll take your juice. And No, there are waterborne diseases and stuff. I mean, and there's malaria, everyone gets malaria occasionally. I mean, if you're living there. So I think if you go as a tourist, obviously those things are very different. You're catered for very differently. But living out there is, a lot of it was the snakes that is the major threat out there. I had a spitting cobra in my tent about a month ago, which I had to evict. So yeah, there are challenges there, but I think it's no different from living, it's just as dangerous in London, but in different ways. Did you have a question? Yeah.
I know in Kenya, on the border between Kenya and Tanzania, there's a lot of cattle raising going on. Do you have that down there with the different tribes?
A lot. I mean, that's a lot of the reason the tribes don't like each other, because both the Maasai and the Barabeg and the Sukuma to some extent really believe that all cattle in the world belong to them, which is not a very realistic viewpoint. But still, they will go and steal the cattle. And so they'll steal 30, and then, of course, the Barabeg come over and steal their 30 back plus another 20. And, that's where some of the problems would come about with people spearing each other and stuff, was about cattle raiding, really has a big impact, because obviously both of them feel very strongly about it. So the cattle rustling is a big deal. Yeah.
Could you explain the satellite collaring the lions and how you go about doing that?
Yeah. So the satellite collars are, so I don't know if you know anything about radio collaring, but basically you put a collar on an animal and it basically transmits, in this case, up to a satellite, its GPS location. And so you obviously have to immobilize the animal, fit it with the collar, and then you set it on its way. And the ones that we're looking to get, hopefully we'd like to do this later this year if we can, are very important, because you draw a polygon on a map and you say to them, okay, when it's in the park, I don't really care what's happening to it, it's just in the park. So maybe you take a fix every 12 hours, but as soon as it comes onto village land, then I'm more interested. And you might ask the satellite to give you a fix every hour. And then if it goes into a smaller predetermined area, which might be a high conflict area or an area right around households, we'll say to it, okay, in this area, we really want to understand how they're moving and and plus the thing about the very expensive fancy collars we're looking at is that once it crosses those boundaries, it will send a text message to us and to the lion guardians in the area to say to them, this lion is right there. You need to go and start trying to make sure that people's cattle aren't out at night and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it will work. And the lion guardians in our area will be key at tracking those lions. They get a more sort of emotional relationship with those particular ones they're responsible for. Hang on one sec. Are you scratching your head? Don't do that. It's like an auction. Yes.
Are there any behaviors that you have discovered that haven't been recorded before, or also about territory sizes?
I think, anything we discover down in Ruaha is certainly novel for that area because nothing's been documented. So there's a lot of stuff that'll be very interesting just because it's in Ruaha and no one's ever looked at that before. Most of what we discovered, I have to say, is about the human behavior. So things like a lot of what we learn about the Barabeg killing and a lot of the cultural relationships with lions and with how they go about the specifics of the rules of killing and how they can get gifts and how long they have to do certain things for. That's all very important for understanding that. And that's all stuff that we're writing up because that hasn't been documented anywhere before. Is there anyone at the back? Yeah, sorry, I'm ignoring you at the back because I can't see.
These smaller areas, where there are smaller populations, where you're kind of like, well, okay, we should forget about these areas. Are there any attempts maybe at populating efforts there?
Yeah, there certainly are areas. You look at South Africa, that's very much a sort of meta-population where people are looking at creating fenced sort of areas and putting in lions back into them, and the conservancy model in both Namibia and Kenya are areas where you're trying to, re-establish wildlife populations and, put wildlife back in them. And that's certainly a way to go forward, and I'm not suggesting that has no value. But on the other hand, I think what we need to do, if we look at a regional or a global way of approaching this, we really need to start focusing on the big populations while we still have them. Because otherwise it's, you end up with all of these small ones, and managing those intensely, you've got to move them, you've got to, look at the population structure, think about reproduction and culling, and all those things, especially in fenced smaller areas. It's a very expensive way of managing wildlife. So if we can look at trying to maintain these big intact habitats, I think it's a better way forward, though other people would disagree. So that's my view. Yes, again, did you have? It's an endless problem. But, I mean, there's local village sort of petrol stations, I'm sure steal it off the big tankers occasionally. They were in trouble for mixing it with kerosene, which isn't what you want in your vehicle. So we do tend to, I mean, when we go now, we buy big drums of fuel. So when we go to the local town, we'll go and we'll buy like 3 or 4 400-litre drums of fuel, and then we'll come back and put them at camp. So that's a much more sustainable way of dealing with it. But the big issue for us really is getting water. So that's something I didn't mention before, but getting water is a total nightmare because there is no running water, obviously. There's a tap in the local village, but that often runs dry, and then during the dry season like now, they only put water to the tap maybe once a week. And so you have to be there on the right day, and then later in the dry season, they cut that off as well. So then you have to go somewhere further away. And, you know, for us, at least we can drive to get to these places, but for the local people who have to walk there, like, it's horrendous to think how you'd be trying to raise a family in conditions like that. Let me see if there's more questions. Yeah.
Could you talk about your Kids for Cats program?
So the Kids for Cats is, the idea, as I mentioned, is just twinning a local village school with an international school. And we try to get basically the international school to do various things to fundraise for the village school. We try to ensure there's some degree of communication to and from, but that is the hardest thing just because, you know, these village schools, they haven't got the time that the international ones have for sort of, I don't know, drawing nice storybooks about their day. That's not a priority. They want to be learning the alphabet, or they want to be just focusing on the syllabus. It's a very different model of education there. But basically, twice a year, we go back to the village school, and we say to them, okay, can you draw up your budget of what you would want to spend maybe your $300 on? And then we go and we buy all that equipment, so there's no corruption. We don't just hand them over the $300. We go and we buy them the books, and we sort of put them in there. We take the pictures, we send those back to the international school. So they get some sort of feedback for, you know, what they're actually helping with, and we can sometimes organize things like, we tried Skype chats. Not surprisingly, it doesn't work very well in the bush. But there's some degree of communication to and from. And then sometimes the international schools will want to extend that relationship and get one of their students from their school to fund that Simba scholarship for someone to go on to secondary school. So that's a good way of linking the two. But yeah, if anyone's interested in that, just definitely get in touch. Cool. Have I exhausted everyone now? Oh, have I not? Is there questions back there? You might just have to shout it out. Yes, yes, yes. Yep. No, I mean, I think it wasn't a targeting thing. I think often they were putting out poison, and that's actually something I didn't mention here, but whereas the young men used to go and just spear the lions in that way that I showed you, often now they're a bit nervous about doing that, and so they will go and put poison out first and weaken the lions so that then it's easier for them to go and spear them. And so often those ones, the ones that respond to the poison are often the females, the pregnant females, because I think they're struggling potentially to get, you know, food another way, or they're not hunting as effectively, so then they seem to be more susceptible to the poison. But it's not a specific targeting. I mean, they don't get more for a female, although interestingly, they don't get less. So if they kill a male or a female or a cub, it doesn't really matter. You know, it's one less lion. Cool, yep. There's no wildebeest where we are, actually. It's not that sort of classic, you know, migration that you get in the Serengeti. I think it's just a different landscape. I mean, there's big herds of elephants. It's one of the most important elephant populations. So, you know, there's tens of thousands of elephants down there. There's species you don't get further in the north because it's where the eastern ecoregion joins the south. So there's things like both greater and lesser kudu. There's Grant's gazelle. There's all sorts of things that, you know, you get quite a very interesting wildlife fauna there. But it's not, you don't get that mass assemblage. You get a lot of buffalo, but that's actually decreasing. But yeah, you get its own sort of unique setup of wildlife. I think I saw a hand at the back. Yep.
When you said that the young women were killed because there was lack of rain,
Yeah.
what is the Tanzanian government doing to counter the witchcraft mentality?
Oh my God, it's so under the radar. I mean, the stuff that goes on in the villages, just there's no police force there. So it's all dealt with very locally. I mean, if someone murders someone else, they will pay them off often. So, you know, they might pay them with, you know, one guy paid off somebody with 30 cows, which is actually quite a big sort of fine. But they do it a lot amongst their communities and their tribal elders. So they don't really raise it with the police. It doesn't go higher up. And they're very resistant to that sort of external impetus. I mean, the Tanzanian government undoubtedly does not like that sort of stuff, because it gives Tanzania a bad image. But most of it doesn't get out, and and they don't really know what's happening down there on the ground because no one will talk to them about it. So it's challenging for them to deal with. But attitudes are changing. People are starting to think that those things are potentially outdated or not as powerful as they were. Sorry, yep.
With the killing of elephants and so on in Tsavo and that area, has any of that moved down in your area?
Definitely, there's a lot of elephant poaching. I would say in the last month to 2 months, there have been like dozens of elephants killed on village land because of the increased access to Chinese road building crews. The road is being improved down there. A lot of that is Chinese infrastructure. It's a very easy way out of the country for ivory, so undoubtedly that's a big issue. And it's a challenging one. Sorry, yep.
You mentioned, lions being close to your fence, and so there were never instances of any lion attacks or humans?
On me or on other people? Oh no, there definitely are. There are lion attacks on people. To some degree, quite a few of them when people are trying to hunt lions. So, fair enough. A few of them have been where lions have attacked somewhat out of the blue on people who were walking along. We looked, because there were actually quite a few lion attacks in our area, we started to look at who was being attacked by lions so we could try to work with the communities to say, who's at risk and maybe what they're doing. And we expected it to be young people and very old people that were at risk. It was all young men between 20 and 45. And they were all drunk. They would come out of the pub, and lions aren't stupid. They'd be like, this is an easy place to find staggering humans. So, people would just stagger completely out of their minds through the bush, and not surprisingly, these animals are very attuned to picking up any form of weakness. And so illness or people being drunk was definitely a big thing. The most recent attack that happened in our village was somebody going and trying to steal a kudu meat off a female with 2 cubs because they wanted to get bush meat so they could eat it. And they said, we do this all the time, it's fine. And that didn't end well. He survived, but only because our guys got to him in time and sort of managed to chase the lion off and stuff. So the human attacks on people are often, done by people. I think if you act responsibly around them, it's relatively rare, unless you get, obviously, a rabid lion. That's going to be horrible. But by and large, we haven't had problems, touch wood, with normal lions, and if you leave them like that. Yep.
You often hear the tropical rainforest of Africa being like natural medicines. Do you have the same situation in like the Serengeti or a bush area where you have?
Definitely. There's a lot of local uses of plants and medicines. If you talk to people, they use a lot of the different herbs that grow there and stuff for medicinal use. So how effective they are, who knows? But, and people often, they distrust Western medicine because they will use the traditional remedies and use the traditional remedies, and only when somebody's very, very sick will they take them to the clinic where they promptly die. And so, of course, everyone says, well, you can't go to the clinic because you'll die. Well, yeah, if you went to the clinic a week earlier, you might not have died. So, but there is a strong use of it, and some of it undoubtedly has value. They've done studies that show that obviously it's not all, hocus pocus, but I wouldn't say it's effective as, as the Western stuff, but it's definitely a change in the culture to be considering it. Can we do the lights at the back a bit? I just worry can we change the lights at all?
Any more questions? We can probably do one more question, and then we're going to have to...
Is there any more questions? Yep, that's cool. I think we're good.
Okay, well, I just want to thank Dr. Amy Dickman again for her excellent talk. Continue our support for Amy and all the work that she's doing. She's getting some excellent results, and we know that she's such a dynamo that we're going to continue working with her. So thank you again, everyone, for being here tonight, and please drive safe on the way home. Go Cards!